17 cartoon crimes, 7 levels. This iceberg is full of some of the most disturbing crimes ever committed in the name of cartoons. They might start out a little goofy and wacky, but trust me, the deeper we get, the more disturbing and shocking everything will become. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. The DuckTales Bandit. Arno Funke wanted to be a cartoonist. The only problem was that his sketches kept getting rejected. By 1988, he was almost 38 years old, working odd jobs painting billboards and varnishing cars, while chemical fumes from solvents slowly ate away at his brain, creating a fog in his head that gave him delusions and hallucinations. He'd stare at his failed artwork and start to see images of Scrooge McDuck swimming through piles of money in the DuckTales cartoon. That's when Funke decided if he couldn't draw his way to wealth, he'd steal it. His first move was transforming his Berlin kitchen into a bomb factory. Using chemistry books and electronic store supplies, Funke built pipe bombs powered by batteries and electric timers. He planted one in Katowice, Berlin's luxury department store, then called from East Berlin demanding 500,000 marks. The plan actually worked because police couldn't trace the call across the divided city's infrastructure. Funke walked away with about $320,000. But the money quickly ran low, and by 1992, Funke was back to extortion, this time targeting Karstadt department stores across Germany. He started calling himself Dagobert, the German name for Scrooge McDuck, telling anyone who'd listen that he wanted to swim in money just like his cartoon idol. Over the next 2 years, he planted increasingly elaborate bombs in Hamburg, Bremen, and other cities, causing around $6 million in damage. His Bremen bombing alone destroyed $4.5 million worth of sporting goods. Funke would attach boxes to trains with magnetic clamps and radio controls, fooling police who expected timer mechanisms. During one famous attempt, he positioned a grit box over a sewer manhole, spent days disguised as a construction worker laying thin concrete, then broke through from below to grab what he thought was ransom money. It was actually worthless paper. Funke was surprisingly capable as a criminal, studying every failed pickup and learning from each near miss with police, while his damaged brain drove him deeper into fantasy and delusion. He'd analyze cartoon strips for new ideas, convinced that Scrooge McDuck's adventures held the key to perfect crimes. The fumes had left him unable to think clearly, but somehow sharpened his criminal creativity. Police spent nearly $20 million trying to catch him across 30 failed money handovers. They even studied 6,000 pages of Disney comic strips looking for clues about his next move. Germans bought "I am Dagobert" t-shirts, while Funke became a folk hero who never seriously hurt anyone. He'd carefully time his bombs to minimize casualties, seeing himself as a harmless prankster rather than a terrorist. The end came in April 1994, when police kept him talking at a phone booth long enough to surround him. Funke immediately confessed, explaining how solvent fumes had scrambled his thoughts and left him feeling suicidal until he found purpose in his cartoon-inspired crime spree. At trials, doctors confirmed the brain damage from years of inhaling toxic chemicals at work. He was sentenced to just under 8 years, but served 6, learning to draw cartoons in prison, and later appearing on reality TV shows. Karstadt still lets him shop in their stores, which is very trusting. So that's the story of Funke's DuckTales. Awoo. Speedy Gonzales, shoplifter. For 40-year-old Speedy Gonzales, yes, you heard me, every trip to Walmart became a chance to walk out with a haul worth thousands.
Gainesville police arrested a man accused of stealing over $20,000 worth of merchandise from several Walmart stores across North Georgia.
He'd cruise through aisles like any other shopper, slipping nicotine pouches, diabetic strips, and packs of gum into trash cans, mailboxes, and plastic bins he'd plucked from a shelf.
Nicotine gum, diabetic strips, high-priced items, although smaller in nature.
At self-checkout, he'd ring up the empty container for its few dollars and slip away with the stash inside. Clever, right?
Well, at Walmarts like this one on Shalford Road, police say Speedy Gonzalez would pick up a larger item like a trash can, then he stuffs it full of smaller, expensive items. Then at checkout, he just covers it and just pays for the trash can.
He repeated the scheme across more than a dozen locations in North Georgia. Hall, Barrow, Gwinnett, Habersham, White, and Lumpkin counties all hit, amassing over $20,000 in stolen merchandise before surveillance teams even caught on to what was going on.
In 2020, Gwinnett County Police arrested him for stealing checks out of a Swanee mailbox and using them to try and buy $3,000 worth of merchandise at a Home Depot store.
He probably would have gotten away with it if he hadn't returned to the same Gainesville store 10 days later, allowing the cameras to flag him again.
Gonzalez returned to this Walmart 10 days later, where Gainesville officers arrested him. Holbrook says they found other stolen items in his car. Investigators say they realized he'd been doing the same thing at other Walmarts.
Officers stopped him, searched his vehicle, and found more pilfered goods, each linked by the same unscanned inside trick. Admittedly, he had something of a history. In 2020, Speedy was busted in Gwinnett County for swiping checks from a mailbox, forging them to buy $3,000 worth of tools at Home Depot, then returning items for cash. That run ended only after months of monitoring. This new spree, though, was a lot more thought out. He had pulled off over 20 thefts before the cops even knew anything was up.
Barrow County, Gwinnett, other Hall County, Habersham, White, Lumpkin. It was determined that Speedy Gonzalez was responsible for over 20 thefts around the North Georgia area. Multiple Walmart stores ranging upwards of $20,000 in theft.
The technology had made it easier for him to get away with the whole thing. Speedy was eventually hauled into Hall County Jail, facing felony charges across multiple jurisdictions for exploiting a loophole that let him slip away for months. However, that loophole is arguably still there, which makes you wonder, who else is sliding small, high-priced items under the radar? And how long before the next Speedy Gonzalez strolls out the door? Level 2. Times Square Toon Brawl. It was your typical afternoon in Times Square, with many underpaid actors in giant sweatsuits preying on tourists who are bad with money. But then, out of nowhere, two of the costumed women started fighting. To be specific, Minnie Mouse and Hello Kitty. To be more specific, Sandra Mocha and Giovanna Melendez. But it's more fun to think of Minnie and Kitty fighting. Apparently, the whole thing unfolded over a tip. Mocha believed she was entitled to a share of the tip and started grabbing Melendez to give up her half. Within seconds, they were in a full-on brawl and right in front of Spider-Man. And all the other people, I guess. That Spider-Man tried to intervene, arms outstretched, but got pushed aside almost instantly as the women continued trading blows in full view of onlookers snapping photos. Hey, where else are you gonna see Minnie Mouse losing her mind like this? The fight got so intense that Melendez actually started bleeding through the mask, eventually forcing security to step in and bring an end to the battle for the sake of young children's everything, really. It's kind of a weird sight to see Minnie Mouse and Hello Kitty both cuffed in Times Square, but you can bet those tourists were pretty thrilled to see it. In court, both Mocha and Melendez were booked on counts of battery and harassment. They didn't make any apologies, didn't try to offer any explanations. They did what any good cartoon character would. They denied the entire thing, despite hundreds of witnesses who recorded it and uploaded it online. Well, there's one less Minnie Mouse and Hello Kitty in Times Square, but there are plenty of Elmos, Spider-Man, and dancing statues of Liberty ready to pick up the slack at least. Erotic Doujinshi Caper, Pokemon. In August 1998, a self-published booklet surfaced in Fukuoka, Japan, depicting Pikachu and Ash in a series of, explicit scenarios. The artist printed a small B5-size run, advertising it via flyers to fellow doujinshi artists, and fulfilled orders by mail, an unfiltered and unregulated system that meant the content would slip easily into young hands. The art itself was a stark, disturbingly intimate, and undeniably exploitative piece of work that was clearly meant to shock more than it was supposed to, arouse. Within months, Nintendo, alongside the Pokemon Company and other rights holders, learned about these mail-ordered pages circulating beyond the niche. On January 5, 1999, they lodged formal complaints for copyright infringement, spearheading what would become the first major legal crackdown on erotic fan creations. 8 days later, Kyoto Prefectural Police arrested the Fukuoka artist under suspicion of violating Japan's strict copyright laws. She was transferred north, held in detention for 22 days, and ultimately fined for selling only 5 copies at 600 yen apiece while storing about 100 awaiting distribution. When you think about it, everybody got very lucky here. The content was very easy to access given the total lack of conventions or age checks. Literally anyone with a mailbox could receive the work, no matter their age or anything else. For their part, Nintendo emphasized that tolerating small-scale doujinshi had been customary, even inevitable. Rule 34 existed even before the internet, so you have to accept it will happen. But this case marked a dramatic turn as the industry expanded. Mail order meant home delivery, and children discovering the franchise on TV could inadvertently order these pages, leading to some very uncomfortable discussions at home. The printing company that produced 460 copies in Aichi Prefecture also faced a 73,000 yen fine in March 1999 for aiding and abetting infringement. This case basically changed a lot of the situation for fan art, which had always thrived in a gray zone, accepted so long as it remained non-commercial or circulated only at local events. Now it was clear that explicit derivative works, especially those portraying underage implied characters, would invite swift legal action from Japan's entertainment giants. And not unfairly, honestly. But artists and printers began self-censoring, conventions instituted stricter guidelines, and mail-order catalogs red-flagged adult content. All this because of one filthy Pokemon drawing. How about that? Now, obviously, we don't have dirty Pokemon content, but we do have a lot of great icebergs like this one, so why not subscribe so you're always caught up? Level 3. Burglar Spider-Man. Maintenance worker Lawrence Cecil Smith III roamed the streets of Los Banos, California.
Detectives say tips helped them identify the suspect as Lawrence Cecil Smith III.
Wearing a Spider-Man mask while committing a string of burglaries that stretched from October 2019 into early 2020. Lawrence's crime spree targeted everything from school sites to storage facilities to commercial businesses, accumulating over $30,000 worth of stolen goods by the time authorities caught up with him.
He's accused of stealing more than $30,000 worth of items from a variety of victims since October.
He stole food items from schools, equipment from construction companies, and personal belongings from storage units.
So some of the places he actually hit was a school site where he stole food items. Others were commercial businesses and some storage facilities,
creating a pattern that left victims scrambling to rebuild their livelihoods.
He told us the suspect also stole a bicycle, food items, and other supplies he relies on to make a living.
The mask became his signature, appearing in surveillance footage across multiple crime scenes as Lawrence worked his way through Los Banos. Living and working as a maintenance person at an apartment complex on San Juan Street, he had the perfect cover for his criminal activities. His position gave him access to tools and knowledge of the community that he exploited, turning his legitimate job into a launching pad for his illegal enterprise. Detective Lyle Kelly would later describe the moment he found the Spider-Man mask hidden under the seat of Lawrence's van as particularly satisfying, knowing they had finally connected the physical evidence to the man terrorizing their community. The discovery came during a search warrant execution at Lawrence's apartment, where investigators uncovered a treasure trove of stolen property, including tools, an airsoft gun, a generator, and countless items reported missing by victims. Lawrence's downfall came through community tips and old-fashioned detective work. Los Banos Police Sergeant Jesse Saya noted how Lawrence targeted diverse locations, from school sites where he pilfered food to storage facilities and commercial businesses. The pattern suggested someone familiar with the area who knew when and where to strike. His maintenance job likely provided him with insights into security measures and schedules that ordinary criminals wouldn't possess. It wasn't difficult to work out. The arrest on February 10, 2020, revealed the scope of Lawrence's crimes. Investigators connected him to 7 confirmed burglaries while reviewing 9 additional cases for potential links. But he added another offense just for good measure. He attempted to post bail using illegally obtained money. His $60,000 bond reflected the serious nature of his crime spree. There was no clear reason for him to wear the Spider-Man mask, but there was a kind of irony to hiding behind a symbol that represents heroism and protection while committing acts that terrorized his neighborhood. Noid hostage delusion, the Noid. Kenneth Lamar Noid burst into a Domino's Pizza on January 30th, 1989, carrying a .357 Magnum and an unshakable conviction that the chain's claymation demon, the Noid, was taunting him personally. He was 22 years old, living in suburban Atlanta, and genuinely believed that Tom Monaghan had swiped his name to mock him in the "Avoid the Noid" ads, that the whole thing was created purely to humiliate him. The moment he stepped inside that store, he felt he had no choice but to see it through to the end. Noid slammed 2 employees against the counter, pressing the barrel of his revolver into their backs, demanding they dial Domino's headquarters and inform them that he'd be needing $100,000 in ransom, a spotless white limousine for escape, and, most bizarrely, a hardcover copy of Robert Anton Wilson's 1985 novel, The Widow's Son. We still don't know why he wanted that book, but maybe he was an avid reader. Over 5 hours, he paced back and forth, firing 2 warning shots into the ceiling to prove he was serious. The situation escalated over time as diners across the street realized the situation. More and more police cars started turning up outside. Noid was focused only on 2 things. Monaghan was a fraud who stole his identity, and he needed all of his demands to be met. Especially the book, for some reason. But as the standoff ground on, he started getting hungry. Hostage-taking is a very energy-consuming thing, apparently, so he ordered his captives into the kitchen to craft 2 pizzas. While he was gorging on those, the hostages seized their chance, slipping out the door in a blur of relief and fear. But now, Noid had no leverage. Nothing was stopping the cops from rushing in and ending his life. With no other choice, Noid surrendered without further violence. He was arrested and charged with kidnapping, extortion, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime. At trial, evidence of his paranoid schizophrenia prevailed, and he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He spent years in institutional care before his life ended in 1995, still haunted by the Noid's shadow. The incident sent ripples through Domino's marketing world, with the character of the Noid retired in the mid-90s, something the company always insisted was coincidental. But even today, the line, "Avoid the Noid," has a different interpretation. The claymation guy was annoying, but the real Noid should be avoided. Mickey with a knife. Rubolino waited on Via Toledo, the busiest tourist street in Naples, and his chosen hunting ground. He wore a Mickey Mouse costume, using it to lure all of the eager tourist children in for a photo. The trap worked every time. He'd wave enthusiastically at passing families, drawing them in with that familiar Disney magic. The photos happened quickly. A few clicks, some poses, everyone smiling. Then came the price. €20 per person, sometimes more. When tourists refused or claimed they had no money, Rubolino's friendly demeanor vanished, and he brought out the knife. One mother posted on social media about her narrow escape with this guy, bringing attention to his horrific intimidation techniques. Turns out she wasn't alone. Multiple tourists reported similar encounters with this guy. Naples had been dealing with crime for decades, a reputation that has kept many visitors away, so it's kind of on brand that they also have a borderline mafioso Mickey Mouse. He knows exactly who to target, how to extort parents out of their money out of fear of dying in front of their children. Local MP Francesco Emilio Borelli compiled a dossier of incidents, but the evidence kept piling up. Videos, witness statements, social media posts from terrified families. Borelli submitted everything to law enforcement, demanding action against what he called real extortion. Naples couldn't afford to have tourists driven away by a knife-wielding cartoon character. Police began setting up what they hilariously called mousetraps, undercover patrols designed to catch Rubelino in the act. They were literally hunting a human who dressed as childhood's most beloved character. Officers would pose as tourists, waiting for him to make his move. As of yet, Rubelino has not been caught. But if, or when he is caught and convicted, Rubelino faces charges for intimidation and extortion. The knife elevated his activity from simple scamming to serious criminal behavior, and now the authorities are out for mouse blood. Scooby's bare-masked revenge. Clyde Gardner watched his girlfriend's garbage routine through binoculars. He was hiding in the woods near their shared home in Malone, New York, tracking her daily patterns after she had thrown him out again on September 25, 2010, ending another cycle in their violent 5-year relationship. They had a child together, but that hadn't stopped the pattern of breakups and reconciliations that defined their toxic relationship. Gardner's first plan emerged from pure desperation. Try to make sense of this one. He would find a bear, end its life, strip away its hide and claws, then wear the animal's skin like some prehistoric nightmare. When his ex-girlfriend stepped outside to take out the trash, he would attack her with the bear's natural weapons and end her life, leaving behind paw prints instead of human footprints. Nobody would ever know. If that sounds familiar to you at all, it might be because it's the plot of a Scooby-Doo episode. I wish I was joking. The scheme bore an unsettling resemblance to The Hairy Scare of the Devil Bear, an episode from Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo that originally aired November 10, 1979. In that cartoon episode, someone disguised themselves as a legendary devil bear haunting cave dwellings in the Grand Canyon. The fake monster used bear parts to create an authentic-looking costume complete with claws and convincing bear tracks. Gardner's bear plot was lifted directly from that episode. But practical considerations derailed the scheme. Finding a bear to eliminate, then skinning it properly, then wearing the bloody hide convincingly, the logistics proved too complex and he was kinda lazy. So he abandoned the bear plan for something more straightforward. Gardner approached a friend with a different proposition: stage a car crash that would eliminate his ex-girlfriend for $15,000. He provided $500 up front along with her photograph and license plate number. See, Gardner had some experience as a demolition derby driver, so he instructed his friend exactly how to make the crash appear accidental. If the initial impact didn't finish the job, the friend should take a shard of broken glass and complete the task by slitting her throat. So, sure, the plan maintained the same obsessive attention to detail and outcome that had characterized his bear scheme, just with different and less cartoony tools. And he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for that meddling friend and his damn morals. Obviously, the friend immediately contacted police, who sent him back to Gardner wearing a hidden recording device, capturing every word of the conspiracy on tape. When Gardner was arrested and charged with attempted homicide, the bear plot came to light during the investigation. At his sentence hearing, Gardner claimed he had been drunk when he made the arrangements and would have called everything off once he sobered up. Or, to put it another way, he was unmasked as just a dumbass guy trying to be a monster. Gardner was sentenced to 15 years in prison with a protective order preventing any contact with his ex-girlfriend until 2031. It remains the only known incident of a Scooby-Doo episode inspiring a murder. Jinkies, what a sentence! Level 4. Clown Princess in the Classroom. A 14-year-old girl had spent the night before researching fatal stab wounds to the heart, calculating exactly where to strike for maximum damage. She carved what's known as a Chelsea grin into her own face, cuts on either side of her mouth designed to mimic Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight. She planned to use them as part of an insanity defense if caught. On April 25, 2016, she showed up to her Hampshire school wearing a bandana to conceal the fresh facial wounds. She had already told another friend that morning she was going to carry out the attack, though the friend didn't believe her. In fact, the girl had been carrying the kitchen knife in her bag, waiting for the right moment. She approached her former best friend with a promise of a gift, luring her to a quiet area of the school grounds. "Close your eyes and put your hands out," she told the 15-year-old victim. But when the moment came to strike, the victim's instincts saved her life. She opened her eyes just as the knife lunged toward her chest and jolted out of the way. The blade pierced through her blazer and shirt, but only caused a superficial puncture wound near her heart. The victim stepped back and ran. The attacker had prepared for this scenario too. She'd sent messages to friends saying she didn't care if they blamed it on the Joker or Columbine. They didn't inspire me, they motivated me. She had backup plans. If the plan does fail, I will say the voices in my head made me do it. Like most modern young killers, the girl had researched the Columbine massacre and Anders Breivik's attack to understand their methods, compiling a kill list of 60 people, including classmates, her mother, and brother. Her GCSE fashion project focused on serial killers Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez because she thought it was cool and edgy. It should have been a red flag. In fact, the whole reason for the massacre was that the teenager wanted to do something sensational so she would stand out from others. She wasn't interested in having a conventional life mapped out for her, so she targeted her former friend because she wrongfully believed the victim had created fake social media accounts in her name the previous summer. The victim had nothing to do with the online harassment, of course. After the attack, the Joker girl was seen giggling as she walked away, as if not even recognizing what she had done. She'd spent weeks planning not just this attack, but also how to end the lives of her own family members while they slept. Her journal, which she later burned, contained detailed plans for a school shooting. Winchester Crown Court heard testimony that revealed the depth of her obsession with violence and notoriety. She'd watched snuff movies online and consumed what the judge later called dreadful material, and planned to carry out her family eliminations in the weeks leading up to the school attack. The psychological profile that emerged was of someone completely detached from normal emotional responses. She told the court she'd planned everything because nothing would be able to hurt her if the people closest to her were gone. She was ultimately convicted of attempted termination and sentenced to 14 years detention with a minimum of 10 years to be served. Evangelion's mother killer. 22-year-old Hiroyuki Tsuchida walked into his family home in Japan on June 14, 2003, carrying a baseball bat and a very twisted interpretation of one of anime's most celebrated series. What happened next would forever link Neon Genesis Evangelion to one of the most disturbing cases of media-inspired violence in Japanese criminal history. Tsuchida had become obsessed with a particular quote from the anime series: "The ultimate conclusion of human evolution is ruin." This philosophical statement, buried within Evangelion's complex narrative about giant robots and existential dread, had somehow crystallized in his mind into a call for action. He believed that humans were unnecessary beings responsible for destroying the environment, and that someone needed to start eliminating them before it was too late. Tsuchida reasoned that if he could bring himself to kill his own family members, it would desensitize him to the act of killing, making it easier to target strangers afterward and eventually save the entire world. So he made that fateful choice. His mother would become his first victim. The attack was brutal and sustained as he struck her repeatedly with the baseball bat until she died. When investigators found the scene, they were horrified by the extent of the carnage and the remains of this innocent woman betrayed by the one person she trusted most. Of course, Tsushida's plan extended beyond his mother. He intended to work his way through his entire family before expanding his mission to the general population. Fortunately, authorities intervened before he could continue. When questioned about his motivations, Tsuchida freely admitted that Neon Genesis Evangelion had provided the philosophical framework for his actions. He explained how the anime had convinced him that humanity itself was the problem, a plague upon Earth that needed to be removed. The case went to trial in Yamagata District Court, where prosecutors detailed how Tsushida's interpretation of the anime had driven him to violence, something he didn't deny. I mean, how could he? The evidence was overwhelming. In February 2004, the court found Tsuchida guilty and sentenced him to 14 years in prison. The judge acknowledged the role that his misreading of Evangelion had played, while making clear that millions of other viewers had watched the same series without developing homicidal tendencies. Well, that we know of. But the incident created a lasting stain on Evangelion's reputation, with many people noting that Tsushida's interpretation completely missed the anime's actual message about human connection and hope. Even the series' notoriously difficult creator, Hideaki Anno, would likely have been appalled by such a fundamental misunderstanding of his work's themes. Or it might have made him start to suspect that maybe humans are the problem. Level 5. Kobayashi's Otaku Nightmare. Young Kaeda Ariyama vanished on her walk home in Nara, Japan, when a newspaper delivery man named Kaoru Kobayashi grabbed and pulled her into his van without warning. That was just the beginning. He used Kaeda's own cell to taunt her mother with a gruesome photo and message claiming, "I've got your daughter." Then, he drowned her in a bathtub, redressed the body, dumped it in a gutter, and watched the panic ripple through the neighborhood, knowing what he had done. Kobayashi had a long rap sheet of attacks on children dating back to the late 1980s, yet nothing about his apartment suggested any link to obsessive fan culture. No posters, no DVDs, no figurines, nothing. Still, once Ariyama's photo surfaced in the media, commentators jumped on to the old excuse. This was the work of an otaku killer, just like Tsutomu Miyazaki years before. Someone obsessed with anime and manga had, for some reason, decided to prey on children. In 1989, Miyazaki had killed 4 girls, kept body parts in jars, even dabbled in cannibalism, and sent the ashes to his victims' terrified families. He stacked his shelves with horror tapes, anime, and erotic magazines, earning the nickname Otaku, and triggered a nationwide moral panic against anyone who collected figures or stayed home to watch cartoons. That moral panic never fully went away in Japan. By casting Kobayashi in the same mold, media and politicians tapped into that fear, blaming anime and manga for twisting men's minds and turning them into outright killers. Headlines spoke of a Moezoku menace, with local councils proposing laws to ban even mild erotic drawings for fear they too would corrupt young men's innocent minds. Police patrols around Akihabara intensified, questioning anyone who looked too shy, too pale, or carried a stack of manga. Otaku shops suffered as customers wondered if their hobby made them suspects. It was insane. It didn't matter at all that Kobayashi had zero interest in manga, or that his sole compulsion was a decades-old craving for helpless prey. In this highly fevered atmosphere, critics lumped all otaku together, insisting that immersive fantasies blurred the lines between play and real life. Anybody who had a single figure on a shelf was capable of a dangerous slip toward depravity. In the courtroom, Kobayashi surprised no one when he pleaded guilty and begged to be put to death swiftly, hoping to leave a legacy as Japan's next notorious child killer. He was sentenced in 2006 and executed in 2013, marking the end of his twisted spree. The otaku excuse has never fully gone away from Japan's criminal justice system. RoboCop's bloody copycat. Nathaniel White sat in the darkness of a movie theater in 1990 watching RoboCop 2 unfold on screen, but he was watching it differently than most of the world. What they saw as science fiction entertainment, he absorbed as instruction. The violent sequel featured a scene where a character's throat gets slashed, followed by a knife cutting down the chest to the stomach, the body positioned deliberately on the train tracks afterward. White memorized every detail.
He would watch movies like RoboCop and RoboCop 2 for hours and hours on end. He'd go over scenes. He would play with the freeze frame.
And he wanted to recreate it.
The first girl that I had killed was from a RoboCop movie. So I did exactly what I seen on the movie.
Now, Nathaniel was already a red flag. He was previously convicted of abducting a 16-year-old girl, serving just 1 year behind bars thanks to a controversial plea bargain. On March 25, 1991, shortly after his conviction but before starting his sentence, Nathaniel encountered 29-year-old Juliana Frank. She was pregnant with her third child when he decided to recreate what he'd witnessed in the movie theater. Her naked body was discovered on abandoned railroad tracks in Middletown, dead exactly as it happened in the movie. Nathaniel served his brief sentence and was paroled in April 1992. That year in prison had only intensified his violent fantasies. Within months, he resumed killing. His second victim was Christine Klebb, just 14 years old and the niece of his girlfriend. The young girl disappeared from a home in Goshen and wasn't found until over a month later. July 1992 became Nathaniel's bloodiest period of all as he violently took the life of Lorette Huggins Revere, a 34-year-old mother of 3, inside her Middletown home. Days later, at the Blue Note Tavern in Poughkeepsie, he encountered cousins Angelina Hopkins and Brenda Whiteside. Both women were last seen getting into Nathaniel's truck. Their bodies turned up weeks later at an abandoned farmhouse. The killing spree ended August 2nd, 1992, when relatives of the Hopkins family conducted their own investigation and provided authorities with Nathaniel's name. He confessed to committing 6 killings and led police to his dumping grounds. Nathaniel received 150 years to life and remains imprisoned at Elmira Correctional Facility. Ichigo's possession killing, Bleach. Gabriel Hikari Yad Elohim had never met Michael Mulholland before, but he wasn't having a good night. After being left waiting for drugs by an acquaintance who fled with his money, Gabriel confronted this 69-year-old pensioner in the stairwell of his Western Springs flat in Auckland and unleashed a savage barrage of approximately 90 strikes. Gabriel punched, kicked, and stomped Michael's head, face, and torso over the course of 7 relentless minutes until Michael died of blunt force trauma.
The CCTV footage that was played to the jury, there's 91 strikes to the body of Mr. Mulholland as he lay on the ground.
Gabriel was initially tried in the High Court where he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was assessed as fit to stand trial, but the jury rejected the insanity defense and found him guilty.
But the jury didn't find him insane.
That's right, and
He received a life sentence with no parole for 13 years. But why the hell did he do it? When he was interviewed by police, Gabriel claimed that he believed himself to be Ichigo Kurosaki, the teenage Soul Reaper from the anime series Bleach.
found it was likely Yad Elohim was hearing voices before the attack and even during the attack. And he said Yad Elohim believed he was a messenger of God.
The day after the attack, in a police interview room, he delivered a monologue in Japanese that mapped closely onto dialogue from the show. In fact, a forensic psychiatrist later discovered a scene in Bleach that mirrored both Gabriel's movements and his Japanese speech. He presented this video evidence to the Supreme Court in mid-2024, arguing it justified an interference that Gabriel had been in the grip of a delusion and was reenacting an anime battle as he bludgeoned Michael. His lawyers begged to keep it out of court, but the Supreme Court acknowledged the new evidence as significant and credible. But it doesn't justify or excuse the act in any way. 2 strangers met by chance, and Gabriel instantly descended into a rage-filled attack for no reason other than he was having a bad night, and for whatever reason he believed he was a cartoon character. It only took 7 minutes for Gabriel to end Michael's life, and in his mind, he was a hero. Level 6. Anime trope turned weapon. Yukitaka Oka waited until her partner drifted into a deep sleep, then plunged a kitchen blade into his abdomen at their Shinjuku apartment. Phoenix Luna obviously woke up in shock and bolted away, blood gushing, collapsing in the lobby before paramedics arrived. In a horrifying photograph that circled the globe, she's seated beside his unconscious form, covered in his blood, effortlessly lighting a cigarette like she's on stage. She later told police, "Since I loved him so much, I just couldn't help it," blaming her obsession for the violence. She admitted she had planned to end her own life once he was gone, believing that only mutual death could seal their bond for all eternity. She sat patiently waiting for his final breath while smoking her cigarette. When they found him, doctors rushed Luna into surgery for massive internal trauma. His liver had borne the full force of the blade. When he arrived, medics gave him just a 20% chance of survival. Still, after repeated transfusions and 5 days unconscious, he awoke to a world that was massively changed. He was shocked and relieved that he somehow made it through this, though he insisted he held no ill will toward her despite the near-fatal injury. The internet, however, didn't feel the same way. They quickly labeled her a yandere, anime shorthand for lovers who switch from tender to deadly. Men online, transfixed by her looks, praised her as a tragic heroine rather than a violent killer. Fan art depicted her in crimson splatter, wielding knives like props. Some even crowdfunded donations for her legal fees, calling her too beautiful to be evil. For those who don't follow anime culture, this was extremely confusing. How could a violent act be romanticized simply because the perpetrator matched an animated trope? In court documents, she described how meticulously planned her killing was. She chose the sharpest kitchen knife, snuck into the bedroom, and seated herself over him before the single decisive strike. She told investigators she rifled through his phone to feed her jealousy, convinced any image of him smiling with another woman was a betrayal. When Phoenix woke up, choking on his own blood, he begged for mercy. She only smiled more brightly when he did. Phoenix Luna's path to recovery included reconciling with siblings he hadn't seen since childhood and returning to his host club work. Yuka Takaoka, by contrast, remains incarcerated. She still has a fan following to this day. Level 7. Kyoto Animation Mass Arson Horror. Shinji Aoba walked through the front doors of Kyoto Animation Studio 1 on the morning of July 18, 2019, carrying 40 liters of gasoline in containers. He had traveled from Saitama to Kyoto with a simple, terrifying plan: to douse the 3-story building with fuel and set it ablaze. He shouted "Die" as he poured the gasoline across the entrance and onto several employees before igniting it with a lighter. The explosion was immediate, turning the building into what witnesses described as a literal hell. The gasoline created an instant inferno that spread with lethal speed. Within 10 seconds, the spiral staircase near the entrance became unusable as an escape route, filled with fire and smoke. The staircase acted like a chimney, funneling the flames and toxic gases upward through all 3 floors. By 30 seconds, another staircase was engulfed in smoke. Within a minute, the 2nd and 3rd floors were filled with combustion gas, reaching temperatures of 100 to 300 degrees Celsius. A dark mushroom cloud of smoke poured up the staircase, with one reporting that within 15 seconds, black smoke welled up from the staircase. 70 people were working inside the building that morning. 20 bodies were found piled on the stairs leading from the 3rd floor to the roof, their final, desperate attempt to escape. They had reached the rooftop door but were overcome by carbon monoxide poisoning before they could open it. Some employees jumped from 2nd-floor windows, their bodies burning as they fled. Others were trapped in stairwells, suffocating on toxic fumes. Aoba himself caught fire while lighting the gasoline, suffering 3rd-degree burns over 90% of his body. He attempted to flee, but collapsed about 100 meters from the building where police apprehended him. As officers subdued him, he shouted accusations about plagiarism, claiming the studio had stolen his novel. His survival was considered miraculous. Doctors gave him only a 1% chance of living, but his final death toll reached 36 people, all employees, mostly young artists in their 20s and 30s. 32 others were injured. The attack became one of Japan's deadliest massacres since World War II and the worst building fire since 2001. But Aoba's motive stemmed from a delusion that bordered on the absurd. He had submitted multiple novels to Kyoto Animation's writing contest in 2017, all of which were rejected at the first stage. The specific scene that triggered his rage was a brief moment in the anime Tsurune, where two characters buy discounted meat at a grocery store. This scene, lasting less than 2.5 minutes, aired in November 2018, exactly 8 months before the attack. Aoba believed this mundane interaction, characters discussing purchasing meat near its expiration date to save money, had been stolen directly from his submission. Investigators who read his novels found his accusations to be utter imagination. The scene he referenced was, as they described, a typical school setting that appeared in every school anime. Kyoto Animation's president flatly denied any plagiarism, yet Aoba's delusion had consumed him entirely. He had planned an earlier attack at Omiya Station in Saitama in June 2019, bringing 6 knives with the intention of committing random violence to force Kyoto Animation to stop plagiarizing. He abandoned that plan only because the station wasn't crowded enough to create what he considered a significant incident. It was a very lucky situation for them. Aoba spent over 10 months in the hospital before police could arrest him in May 2020. When he finally stood trial in September 2023, appearing in a wheelchair and wearing a surgical mask, he pleaded guilty. His defense team argued he suffered from mental illness and couldn't be held responsible, but prosecutors and psychiatric evaluators determined he was fully competent. The court found him guilty of the charges and sentenced him to death on January 25, 2024. The building itself met all fire safety codes and had even received commendation from Kyoto City for excellent fire safety practices. But no safety measure could have prevented what happened when Aoba walked through those doors with his gasoline and lighter, consumed by a delusion so detached from reality that it cost 36 people their lives over a fictional scene about buying cheap meat. Manga Death Note replica horror. In late September 2007, 2 hikers in Brussels Duden Park were stopped by a rancid stench. Pushing through the undergrowth, they stumbled on a dismembered torso and 2 thighs. Nearby lay 2 scrawled sheets in multicolored ink declaring "Watashi wa Kira desu," a botched version of the anime line "Watashi wa Kira desu," I am Kira, the self-appointed god of justice from the series Death Note. Forensics quickly determined the remains were fresh, no more than a day or 2 old unless stored in a freezer, which could explain the surgeon-sharp cuts. The victim was a Caucasian man in his 20s or early 30s. His thighs and scrotum had been shaved, a detail investigators flagged as a sign of a cold, ritualized act. There was no wallet and no ID, just flesh and ink. Police combed the scene and uncovered a 50-meter trail of rice grains leading to a Japanese character drawn in the grass, another eerily theatrical touch that linked the crime directly to the manga world. During the investigations, detectives initially considered pranks by medical students since the school year had just begun and bodies were accessible in university settings, yet they couldn't rule out a serial perpetrator. A lone jogger reported seeing a blonde man lying in the same spot 2 days earlier, but her description failed to prove whether he was the victim or a wandering sleepwalker. The choice of Duden Park was also deliberate. It sits at Brussels' highest elevation, perhaps selected as a symbolic throne for a would-be deity of death. Yet the theatrical notes proclaimed a scene lifted directly from Death Note, as if a fan had crossed the boundary from fiction to reality. It took until September 2010 for the case to crack. 4 men, all manga enthusiasts, were arrested. 3 confessed to the beating death of their roommate during a heated dispute, followed by frantic dismemberment and a Death Note homage at the dump site. They had killed the victim over an argument about rent and living arrangements. Convictions followed in 2013. 2 received 20-year terms, another got 23 years, and the 4th faced charges for failing to assist a person in danger. Brony mass shooting tragedy. Brandon Scott Hole, a 19-year-old former FedEx employee, drove up to the Indianapolis FedEx ground facility just before 11 p.m. on April 15, 2021.
Well, Debbie, just kind of touching on what Russ said there, this 19-year-old suspect is a former FedEx employee.
He briefly spoke with security at the entrance, then retreated to his vehicle. Moments later, he stepped out wielding a rifle and began firing indiscriminately at workers in the parking lot. 4 people fell outside before he moved toward the turnstiles, pressed the barrel of his weapon through the bars, and opened fire again, striking 4 more inside the building. In less than 4 minutes, 8 lives were extinguished and several others injured before Brandon turned the gun on himself, ending his own life on sight. In the aftermath, investigators discovered a disturbing social media post less than an hour before the attack. "I hope that I can be with Applejack in the afterlife. My life has no meaning without her." For those who do not know, Applejack is a character from My Little Pony, which means that Brandon was a brony. In fact, Brandon maintained 2 Facebook pages dedicated to the cartoon series, which were removed at law enforcement's request. Internal communications from Facebook noted that while the brony community occasionally harbored extremist elements, there was no clear evidence that this pony devotion directly fueled the killing spree, despite the clear link that he himself put out there. Before the FedEx rampage, Brandon's mother had alerted authorities to his warning signs. In March 2020, she contacted police fearing he sought suicide by cop, and officers temporarily seized a shotgun from his home. The FBI interviewed him during that period, but returned his firearms after concluding no criminal violation had occurred and finding no hateful ideology in his online activity. But despite these interventions, Brandon legally purchased 2 rifles later that year and retained access to high-capacity magazines. The facility's strict no-phone policy complicated early rescue efforts. Witnesses reported that people inside, unable to call for help, huddled beneath desks as bullets tore through walls. An employee's lone return fire missed Brandon, who then returned to finish his own life. First responders arrived within minutes but found only the aftermath of the carnage. Indianapolis police later classified the attack as suicidal killing rather than hate-driven or terror-related. Special Agent Paul Keenan said Hole sought to prove his masculinity and capability through mass violence, a final twisted desire to experience taking lives. Yet nothing about his online pony fandom offered a straightforward motive. Clearly, he was somewhat motivated by his love for Applejack, but nobody could find a route to link that to the killings. If you're still in the mood for more disturbing cartoon icebergs, feel free to check out this video on the most disturbing Family Guy moments.